Hey, so we're in this fantastic rocky outcrop, woodland kind of environment. We're up at Kapishya Springs. There is so much kind of going on here. We got some Xenorchis stabilis orchids growing on these rocks. We have these little Streptocarpus rhodesianus growing here, which is fantastic to see. Just up above here, massive clumps of Bulbophyllum fuscum growing. Even on the trees here, we've got this little Polystachya concreta growing quite happily. It is such a fantastic environment, lots of areas of seepage happening. So even if it doesn't get any direct rain like those Streptocarpus, they will get water from the seepage through these rocks. And then this system feeds down into the grasslands, which we have also been in. So let us go and see what there is to find and take it from there. Before we get back to any of the vegetation, just kind of a little background. Kapishya Hot Springs Lodge is up in the Muchinga province of Zambia, along the Muchinga Escarpment, towards the edge of it, I believe. It's set on the Mansa River. It's a bit of a drive to get to from Lusaka, but it is well worth the trip in terms of it is fantastically relaxing place to be. Even if you're not going into the bush and traipsing around as we do, looking at vegetation, the chalets are really comfortable. The grounds are quite relaxing and quiet. You hear a lot of bird song and things like that. The sound of the river is absolutely lovely. And then, of course, there is the hot springs to be able to enjoy. It's not my first time at Kapishya Hot Springs. I was up there several years ago for some other work, and it's just always a relaxing place. And being able to then, at the end of the day, or even at the starting of the day for that matter, to be able to take a dip in the waters in the hot springs and just relax and just, let your troubles kind of melt away once you get into these warm waters is just absolutely fantastic and well worth, as I say, the trip up there, even just for a few days stay if one can make it. But that said, we were there to do some serious work, and as much as I did enjoy traipsing around in the hot springs, we did have work to do. The grounds around the lodge are a mix of Dambo grasslands as well as riverine vegetation, and evergreen relict forest patches, locally known as mosquitos. The rocky hills are usually vegetated with a miombo or brachystegia kind of woodland component, and these can be quite interesting just based on the seepage that is created as rain filters through these hills down through the woodland and then eventually kind of ending up in the grassland areas before making its way into the surrounding river. And it just gives such a variable area for vegetation. The rocky outcrops themselves can be anything from small little boulders to massive boulders the size of transport trucks and things like that. And all of this ends up being scaffolding for so many things to grow upon and survive. This little Biophytum Gesneriaceae growing in the crags of little rocks with its lovely little ferny foliage and white flowers is just lovely. The Streptocarpus rhodesianus, as I alluded to in the beginning, was just all over and growing in these little areas of seepage that won't ever get rain, but that the seepage drains through. The orchids that we came across as well, this Disperis katangensis, and then another related species, Disperis reichenbachiana, also love these little moss-covered cracks in the rocks and areas where soil will build up and either terrestrial or epiphytic species will predominate. Here we have Polystachya concreta growing quite happily over the rock surfaces, which was just absolutely stunning. There are a few mysteries for me still. This Ledebouria species I've come across, and I did collect. I flowered it with little pink flowers. I don't know what it is at the moment. This little tiny ground-dwelling Ledebouria, collected it. It grew for me but didn't flower, unfortunately. Still waiting to kind of find out what those are. But we were there mostly for orchids, and the terrestrial orchids, especially those in the Disa genera, are actually stunning plants. And this Disa engleriana never lets anybody down with the stunningly beautiful bright pink flowers that they have amassed in this section of Zygotritonia nyassana, which is a small flowered plant, but I think is actually quite charming, and love it just for its simplicity. Other members of the Iridaceae family, Gladiolus gregarius was around too and in flower at that time of year, which was nice to see. And the rocks were then strewn with this Euphorbia graciola subspecies zambiensis, with smaller specimens as these were, but then also quite some larger specimens on higher up areas of rock outcrops and so forth. I had a little area where I talked about a type of Euphorbia cooperi that was also growing there, but unfortunately I was not recording the audio at the time, so it's just me talking there without hearing anything, unfortunately. But there's so much to kind of explore in these rocky areas. There are the in-between areas, there are the seepage areas that created, there are the trees, there are climbing on top of these massive boulders, climbing to the very peak, as I did to get the initial kind of 365-degree view, which was very lovely. There's just so much to see and so little time to do any of that. But, now we'll move on to looking at some of these grasslands that we were also exploring during our trip there. And these are usually areas that kind of flatten out just before it hits the river. And some of them can be quite small. Others, like this one, were on the larger side. And inside them, they are usually kind of rich with orchids. This is a really small, almost insignificant one that you'll miss if you don't really pay too much attention. Platycariini isoetifolia, and then another Platycariini that we also came across, which is the Protearum, are both kind of small and greenish flowered species that you just have to be really on the lookout to notice them. But a lovely little thing to come across at the same time. Some of the more colorful, like this Brachycariathus buchanani, are very common and widespread, but again, it's something that I always do love to kind of come across. Some of the more interesting ones then, things like the Disa species again, with this Disa equestris blooming quite happily in the wet parts of the Dambo, was always lovely to see. And then some of the non-orchid species like this Morea brevifolia, my first time coming across this in particular species. I've come across larger flowered species before, but this one was quite nice in its small simplicity when we came across it. Then things in the Streptocarpus family. So we've got this Melobium holubii, which I've come across on several occasions in other parts of the country, but it's just one that always kind of makes me wonder. It's such a fantastic little flower. And then some of the kind of grass-like but flowering species like this xeris. They're difficult to tell apart. I don't even try usually. I just say xeris, and that's what I leave it. But they are fantastic little species. And then we have things like the Aphrosolon. Here we have Eranthranthus. Again, a nice kind of bright member of the Iridaceae family. And then sometimes interesting things. This is Bucknera prorepens in a semi-parasitic family with these beautiful little bluish purple flowers. Unfortunately, we didn't have as much time there as I'd like. This year was also on the drier side, so not as many things were blooming, but I'll make the best of it when we are up there and enjoy what we can as we can. I do love walking through these kinds of environments, and there's just so much to see every time of year. But Also, before kind of wrap up, it's hard not to then talk about the Shiwa House. Shiwa Ngandu has such a interesting history in Zambia. It is a wonderful place to visit, driving for quite such a time to get to this stunning kind of manor house in the middle of Africa. Well worth a visit. I've been to see the outside numerous times. Unfortunately, I've never been able to be there early enough to get a view of the inside, but maybe one of these days soon. Hey, so we have finished up here at Kapishya Hot Springs. We're going to be moving on to our next location up near Mbala. It's been a great trip, lovely few days here at the lodge. Really enjoyed the hot springs, saw some fantastic habitats along the way and some beautiful plants, but it's time to move on. So I'll definitely look forward to being back here again at some point in time. Not sure when, but hopefully sooner rather than later. Join us for our next video, and until then, cheers.
The frogs.
Yeah, they're so interesting. These tiny little things.
I would assume they're making their way to the river, or off the river.
I have no idea. And I can't, until he moves, I can't see where he is, but I want, a little bit of scale here.